Hello, everyone, and welcome to our fourth in the series on James Madison, presidential series presented by J.B. Andersen through cooperation of Ramsey County Library and OLLI Lifelong Learning. My name is Kay Jacobson. I am the history programmer for the Ramsey County Libraries, and it is my great pleasure to introduce you to J.B. Andersen. Take it away, J.B.
Thank you. Today we're going to start talking about Dolley Madison. It's a lengthy section of 59 slides, but she did some pretty incredible things. So let's take a look at the first slide. We're going to talk about her and James Madison and how they met. Her name was Dolley Payne as unmarried woman. She then married a man named Todd, and Mr. Todd died after they'd had a child. So she became a widow, and she was introduced to James Madison by, of all people, Aaron Burr, pictured here when they were all much younger folks. She was 5 feet 7 inches tall. Madison was 5 feet 4 inches tall. So she stood higher than he did. He was 43 when they married. She was 26. This was not unusual. As a matter of fact, it was somewhat common during the 1800s in particular. Large age difference. By the 2000s, it started to become a bias that a lot of people have. Today, it's still considered, gee, that's kind of strange. I don't know. I've spent a lot of time in New York City. Not unusual to see 50-year-old men with 30-year-old women in New York City. Other places I've been, it's very unusual around the United States. In the 1800s, however, 17 and 1800s, this was not uncommon, frequently because men's wives died in childbirth and the available living women were generally much younger. So some say this age difference in marriage is the last bias of the 21st century. Now, they never had children, but she had a son by this first marriage. His name is John Payne Todd, pictured here. And Madison adopted Todd, so there was a legal relationship between them. One of the very interesting things about Dolley Madison was, as First Lady in the White House, she rescued a portrait of George Washington. Well, what were the circumstances? It was the War of 1812, and the British attacked Washington, D.C. They set a major portion of the Washington, D.C. area on fire, and it included the White House, and it included other famous buildings of the time. Dolley Madison had to get out of the White House. She was going real slow because she wanted to rescue this painting of George Washington that you see here on the slide, and wanted to take it with her, and people were yelling at her that we need to get going. But she got a crew together, and she eventually wrote a letter to her sister. I'm going to read it to you. Our kind friend, Mr. Carroll, has come to hasten my departure and is in a very bad humor with me because I insist on waiting until the large picture of General Washington is secured, and it requires to be unscrewed from the wall. This process was found to be too tedious for those precious moments. I have ordered the frame to be broken and the canvas taken out. It is done, and the precious portrait placed in the hands of two gentlemen of New York for safekeeping. And here's a painting of them attempting to remove it. And they had a lot of trouble with the screws in the frame being attached to the painting, the wall, and consequently, it all got taken care of with the frame left behind. The White House was rebuilt after this fire and during the War of 1812, and the portrait was returned to Washington, D.C., and here it is. There's been a total of 3 copies made of this portrait. There's one is hanging in the White House. One is in the National Portrait Gallery, where there's a portrait of each president. And I haven't been able to find out where the third one is. Dolley Madison as First Lady is our next topic. She really invented the role of First Lady. She became a hostess for major events and a political advisor to her husband, the president. The other First Ladies previous to Dolley Madison really weren't much involved, and people could come and go at the White House as they pleased. They would frequently just walk in the front door and somebody'd go get the president who would talk to them. Thomas Jefferson, when he heard a knock on the front door of the White House, would frequently just go and answer it. So she's the longest serving First Lady. She had 3 different appointments as First Lady. Thomas Jefferson, when he became president, before Madison was president, Thomas Jefferson had been married, but his wife had died. So he did not have a First Lady. He called on Dolley Madison because James Madison was a good friend. And for 8 years, Dolley Madison served as First Lady under Thomas Jefferson. Her husband is then elected to the presidency, and she serves 8 years as First Lady with her husband. And this is where she really made drastic changes, became a political advisor, not simply a greeter, and became a hostess who really planned major events, especially when there were important visitors to the White House. Third, Martin Van Buren became president after James Madison. Martin Van Buren's wife had died before he became president. Now, Dolley Madison's son, he married Martin Van Buren's niece. And Martin Van Buren said he called on both of these women. His niece, married to Dolley Madison's son, and Dolley Madison herself, and said, "Would you two serve together during my presidency," which lasted just 4 years. So they shared duties under Martin Van Buren. This is Elizabeth Van Buren, who served with Dolley Madison and who was married to Dolley Madison's son. Dolley Madison served 20 years total as First Lady. This is a record that will probably never be beaten, unless, of course, we move to a dictatorship, in which case we might have a dictator for 30 years or something like that, and a wife who serves as First Lady for even longer than Dolley Madison. Let's take a look at her physical appearance. Giving you a warning here because, these are observations. They are not opinions. So this section is about her looks. It's something that we try not to talk about very much today in the lives of women. A lot of the information contained in this section is from diaries. Diaries were regularly kept through the 1800s, especially by famous people. So please see this as a report. It's not an opinion, it's a report about the times. Both men and women kept diaries. The notions that I'll talk about concerning Dolley Madison appeared in both male and female diaries. First of all, there are lots of comments about her large breasts. That was unusual in that day and has become more common. She wore empire-style dresses. This is a term that was popularized under Napoleon. Napoleon and the French were spreading out across Europe, even into North Africa and the Middle East, and an attempt to take over Russia. So the French, under Napoleon, had established an empire. This style of dress, where the waistline was just below the breastline, as you can see in this dress here, this became known as an empire-style dress. And she wore that style of dress throughout her life. She also wore turbans, as you see here. This is a large scarf wrapped around the head. This made her appear even a few more inches taller than her 5'7" frame. So here's a picture, a painting of her and James Madison. Actually, this is something somebody put in front of a photo, and you can see the two of them standing there, and that she is indeed taller than he is. Her hair was black, but naturally curly. Big deal for the time. There were not beauty salons. Hair curling was very minimally done. She also had blazing blue eyes. You can see the blue eyes here in this portrait. She was reported in diaries of both men and women as being stunningly beautiful, very attractive. The male presidents of the 1800s were commented on also. This is Chester Alan Arthur, and his suits get a lot of comments. To this day, Chester Alan Arthur is considered the best dressed president of all time. Dolley Madison and ice cream. Now, she really popularized ice cream, regularly served it during the Jefferson administration. Jefferson's generally credited with having introduced ice cream to the United States. This is not entirely true. The oldest known handwritten recipe for ice cream is in the handwriting of Thomas Jefferson. And when he was a diplomat in France, that's when he learned about ice cream and really liked it. Brought back an ice cream bucket, such as you see here, and he brought back a recipe, but there wasn't much he could do with it, and he tried to tell servants about it, but it was Dolley Madison who really started serving it at White House functions, made it a popular item among all the famous mansion people of the Washington, D.C. area in particular. The Madisons, both Dolley and James, had a pet parrot, and we're going to talk about that pet parrot. She taught it to say Constitution. Her husband is known as the father of the Constitution. So this was a very important word in the Madison household. Generally, she'd walk around the White House with the parrot on her shoulder. This is not the kind of parrot that she had. It's just a picture of a parrot that I picked out. It's not their parrot. So they kept this bird in the front entry of the White House generally when she wasn't walking around throughout the White House with it on her shoulder. When people would enter this front entry room that you see pictured here, the parrot was taught to start speaking when it saw a person, and it 3 times it would say, Constitution, Constitution, Constitution. So that was generally the first thing that visitors to the White House heard, was the Madison parrot using the word Constitution. Dolley Madison's religion, her background and beliefs, the big church group in the colonies was the Church of England. The British controlled the colonies, so the Church of England was there. Now, when the U.S. separates from England, we don't want to call it the Church of England anymore. It takes on the name Anglican Church. That had actually started even earlier. Now, she then, having had attended the Church of England, now became a person attending Anglican churches in the United States. But when she married Mr. Todd, he was a Quaker. So her first husband was a Quaker. She had to become a Quaker also. When she married Madison, her husband died. She remarried somebody who wasn't a character, a member of the Quakers. She was read out by the Quakers. That's a term that meant you can't be a member here anymore because your husband isn't one of us. So she was read out. The Quakers would have church services such as you see here. Women were included. They didn't have to sit separately. But the Quakers were quiet. They didn't have sermons. They didn't have a lot of prayers. This was something you did by yourself, sitting quietly with the group, and it was a religious moment, generally on a Sunday morning. She was able to get rid of her gray dresses. Quaker women were not allowed to get themselves all dressed up, fancied up. They could wear black and gray. They covered their heads, such as you see in the photo on the right. So once she was read out of the Quakers, she began dressing in the picture that you see in the lower left, in dresses with a lot of more flair to them. More area of the body was exposed, and the dresses had color. She was a smoker. This is what she smoked, was a corncob pipe like this. And she smoked it in public when she was at meetings, etc., commented about extensively. Children, let's take a look at the son that she had by her first marriage. She and James Madison were childless, but this is her son, aged 10 or 12, and then aged roughly about 18 to 21. His name was John Payne Todd. Remember, Payne was her maiden name, before her marriage name. Todd was her husband's name. This Payne being her birth name and her son's second name, nonetheless, she called them by this birth name of hers, which was Payne. So John Payne Todd went by the name Payne. He was 17 years old when Madison started his presidency. Went to college in Baltimore, which is very close to Washington, D.C., so there could be back and forth travel between Baltimore, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. He got himself involved in quite a scandal, and this was kind of a reverse of the practice of age differences in marriage. He was young. The woman he was involved with was much older. Generally, it was considered okay for men to marry younger women. The reverse of that was seen as kind of, you could even use the word scandalous, but it was generally seen as very unusual. James Madison and Dolley Madison did not like it. As a result, James Madison appointed his adopted son to aid in the negotiation of the War of 1812 treaty, which was a war with England, but the treaty was being negotiated in Russia. So off the kid goes to Russia to get him away from this much older woman. In Russia, he becomes very close to Russian princess, the daughter of Tsar Alexander I. She disappeared while he was in Russia. She has never been found. And this is a picture of Alexander I, who was the Tsar, and whose daughter, John Payne Todd, had been seen with, getting involved with, etc., and who then has just disappeared from history. He decides he's going to stay in Europe. Got very interested in gambling there, also in drinking. So he became a gambler and an alcoholic. And in both cases, in his situation, these were addictions. He was in Europe for 20 years. After 20 years, he had accumulated a debt from gambling of $20,000. By inflation, that's about $800,000 in 2020. So a sizable chunk of money. Twice in Europe, he was sent to debtor's prison because he was not making regular payments on these debts. Eventually, he got out of debtor's prison in both cases, was able to resume payments. Finally, James Madison and Dolley Madison pay off this $20,000 debt that he had incurred. This put them in financial decline. Having $20,000 was a great deal of money in the early 1800s. Here's a thing, looks like a photo, but it isn't. It's faked. This is a painting, but of course, paintings were very realistic in the 1800s. And after the White House, what does Dolley Madison begin to do and get involved with? James Madison died in 1836. This was 19 years after his presidency. Here is his tomb area. You can see there's a large obelisk. This tower here. See this? Here's a picture of it. It says Madison, born March 16, 1751, died June 28, 1836. So this is his burial place. She is still alive. She wants to get away from the plantation where there's very little social events, etc. She returns to Washington, D.C., which is a city and has lots of interesting stuff going on. She can be a socialite in Washington, D.C. This is a picture of the house that she purchased in Washington, D.C. It's on Lafayette Park. The White House is also on Lafayette Park. Today, Lafayette Park is a scene of lots of protests because it can be seen then from the White House. Let's take a look at the location here of this house. Here's a picture of it in black and white, more from the front. There's a side view, color, modern picture of the house that she lived in. Here is a map. Here's the White House, and you can see right across the street from the White House is Lafayette Park. This is Lafayette Park. Here is Dolley Madison's house. She lived there from the death of her husband in 1836 to her own death in 1849, a total of 13 years. Just a few houses down the street toward the White House is William Seward's house from the 1860s. He was in the cabinet of Abraham Lincoln. When Lincoln was assassinated, there were actually many men involved, and they were going to assassinate the vice president and all the members of the cabinet as well. The only assassin who got through to a vice president or to any of the cabinet members was the man assigned to assassinate William Seward. He stabbed Seward in his home several times, including in the face. Famous. Here's the Decatur house. This is Stephen Decatur. It's a man credited with winning the War of 1812, a military person. So anyway, you can see here, she's just a block and a half roughly from the White House area. This is St. John's Church. Remember Donald Trump marching from the White House to the St. Bible taken. The St. John's Church rolled with this. They were critical of Trump marching up to this church from the White House, walked past Dolley Madison's former home. She was frequently invited to White House events since she was just a block and a half away. So it was a big deal. You'd go to a party at the White House, and frequently Dolley Madison was there. And having been First Lady for such an extended period and being heavily involved in lots of interesting things like the War of 1812, for instance, she was well known, well liked. James Polk was president. His wife, who was First Lady, didn't like alcohol. Hey, you can't be a Christian and drink alcohol. That was her point of view. So she banned alcohol in the White House. So every time there was a gathering or a dinner or a luncheon or something like that in the White House, there was no alcohol. So Dolley Madison said, okay, all you folks going to the White House, come to my house first. And they'd have an alcohol party at Dolley Madison's house. Then they'd walk down to the White House during the James Polk presidency. Dolley Madison's house, pictured here from the front, came to be known as the Wet House because it was a place where you could get an alcoholic beverage during the Polk administration. Her death. She died in 1840. Here was time at her because she was our First Lady. It was only 20 years, but basically for half a century, she was well known in the United States and had parties at her house in Washington, D.C. after the death of her husband. So that's why he mentions half century. And that's the end of our talk on Dolley Madison. We're going to talk about James Madison again, and he was Secretary of State under Thomas Jefferson from 1801 to 1809, full 8 years, the full 2 terms of Jefferson. And we're going to talk about what happened during this 1801 to 1809 period, particularly as Madison was Secretary of State. So first we have an introduction. Again, this was during the administration of Thomas Jefferson. A criticism of Madison that was regularly heard throughout his 8-year term as Secretary of State is the guy has no experience in foreign affairs. He has no knowledge really about matters foreign. Policy change. This deals with France. We need to talk about that also. Democrats, Madison was a Democrat, as was Jefferson, had always supported France. France really helped us a great deal during our revolution. And it was France really that won the American Revolution for us. When British troops were backed up against a port city in the United States, the United States only had 5 naval ships, but the French had brought many naval ships over to the US to aid us, and they blockaded that port so the British couldn't get out. And the British ended up having to resign. That ended the war. The United States had won the American Revolution as a result. Also, France had given us military people, most famously the Marquis de Lafayette. So France, then after the United States is established in 1789, in 1792, France has a revolution of its own. And it throws out the king. It doesn't just throw him out. Both the king and his wife are executed. So France is anti-monarchy. The Democrats really like this. We should be siding with France. Now, the Federalist Party, which was the other big party, led mostly by John Adams, they wanted England to be our partner. Hey, we had a war with England. We defeated them. We won our freedom. They haven't had a revolution. They still have a king. Why do we want to side with them? Well, the reason was England was the major manufacturing country in the world. They traded all over Europe and all over the Americas. They were an economic power. So the Democrats are arguing for France and a political system, no monarchy. And the Federalists are arguing for economics, trade facilities, etc., with Great Britain. Well, eventually, Napoleon declares himself king. He reestablishes a monarchy. So France has returned to a nobility system. United States expansion occurred. A great deal of that occurred during the Madison administration as Secretary of State under the presidency of Thomas Jefferson. First thing we're going to talk about is Louisiana Territory. It's owned by the French. They're fighting wars like crazy in Europe. They would love to have a large chunk of money. So Madison, as Secretary of State, he approaches Napoleon, and he says, hey, we'd like to buy New just this chunk down here. That would give the United States, we offered $10 million. Napoleon said, no, I don't want to sell just that little chunk. I want to sell the whole of the Louisiana Territory to you. How's 15 million sound? A lot of people didn't like it. Jefferson did favor it. Here's the whole of Louisiana Territory. 10 million offered just for this. 15 million asked for all of this. So Napoleon offers to sell this gigantic chunk that you see on the map here in white, famously known as the Louisiana Territory. $15 million is about $300 million in 2022 by inflation. The United States military budget in 2022 was at $91 million per hour. In 3 hours and 6 minutes, we could have bought Louisiana Territory at the spending rate of the 2022 Department of Defense. Added to the United States with the Louisiana Purchase was 828 square miles. There were 15 states now this is 1803. In the United States, there are now 15 states. Tennessee and Kentucky have been added to the original 13. Those 15 states total 865,000 square miles. Consequently, the acquisition of the Louisiana Territory almost doubled the size of the United States, even though it wasn't a state yet. It was divided up into states. It was a territory, but it made land that the United States owned about twice the size, doubling it. Here is a map. You can see eventually, now we've got all this territory. All this stuff in the light blue is caught between the states and the Louisiana Territory. So we take all that over very soon after the Louisiana Territory. Here's Mississippi Territory, 1804. Orleans Territory, 1804, we secured that. Illinois, 1809, Michigan, 1805, Indiana, 1809, Ohio becomes a state here, 1803, along with the Louisiana Purchase. So, Secretary of State, we're going to continue U.S. Expansion, take a look at some land purchases. Can the United States legally buy foreign territory? This became a big issue in the Jefferson administration. Can the executive branch do it? Is this something that only Congress can do? Which branch of government is in charge of buying land that isn't part of the United States? Now, we're just doing this with the Louisiana Territory. Jefferson is very doubtful about all this, this being the power of the presidency to take on new land. He says, I think we need a constitutional amendment that allows the executive branch to do that. Madison went to Jefferson and said, no, that's too complicated. I mean, it's just a horrible thing trying to get an amendment passed and then approved by states. So Madison said, no, constitutional amendment isn't necessary. Just make the arrangements to buy the land, then go to Congress and say, here's what I want to do. Let them vote on it. End of story. No constitutional amendment. It's just you decide, and then Congress gets to tell you yes or no. Well, Congress approved the purchase of Louisiana Territory, so the precedent got set on how the United States could acquire new territory. Constitutional amendment, let's take a closer look at that. First, it has to be approved by Congress, written up. Then a 2/3 vote of the Congress is required, not a simple majority. Then 3/4 of the states have to approve it before you get a constitutional amendment. You can see this is very difficult to do. We've had 27 of them in about 240 years or so. So roughly one a decade or one every 8 or 9 years. However, the first 10 were all at once. So would the French have waited for us to have gone through all these approvals? That was another issue that was, this could have taken years to have a constitutional amendment. Frequently, it does take years. Would the French have waited that long? Maybe they'd have sold it to another foreign government. Napoleon wanted money. He was fighting wars in Europe. He wanted to gain more empire surrounding France, in North Africa, etc., everywhere. So another argument that was used with Jefferson is, hey, we don't have a lot of time here. We're going to continue with United States expansion, this time Florida purchase. Here, Florida is owned by Spain. Here is a picture of Spain on your right and Florida on the left. Spain refused to negotiate. They were approached. We'd like to buy Florida from you. Nope, we're not even going to talk to you. So nothing came of that. Eventually, we were able to take over Florida. British hostilities, ships and sailors. This is known here as impressment. And this became an issue between the United States and Britain. Now, the United States had, as a nation, had very few ships. It had a few naval ships. The big ship owners in the United States were privately owned ships that were trading with Europe. Okay, the British are involved in lots of skirmishes with other countries. During those skirmishes, British soldiers are killed. They need to be replaced. Sometimes the British would just pull up next to a privately owned American vessel that was trading in Europe, and they'd say, we're 4 people short here. We need 4 sailors. We're picking these 4 guys. And this became known as impressment. You impressed sailors from private U.S. ships, other countries also. So here a plank has been placed between 2 ships, and the British are marching 3 men onto the British ship, where they will be forced to serve in the British Navy. It's kidnapping. British say it's not kidnapping, that these people, when they get on board our ship, they're British citizens. U.S. is, it's been 30 years. We're pushing during the Jefferson administration here, and during Madison being Secretary of State, the United States has been around for 30 years. The United States says you're crazy. They aren't automatically British citizens, they're U.S. citizens. There are 3 acts that are passed about these British hostilities, especially impressment. The Non-Importation Act of 1806, the Embargo Act of 1807, and the Non-Intercourse Act of 1809. These are all acts of the U.S. Congress. Now, this third one, Non-Intercourse Act, I don't think you could teach that in Florida or Texas. British hostilities. Let's take a look at the Non-Importation Act first. This forbade all importation of any British products. Now, Britain's a major trade country in the world, and especially between the Americas and Europe. And we want to get even with them somehow. So actually, very stupidly, we say, okay, no more trade with Britain. Now, this eliminates all these things down the right-hand side from being purchased from England, which was the major supplier of these items, in some cases, the only supplier. They included paper, nails, clothing, playing cards, all beers, paintings, prints, glass, and silver. Hope was this would help the United States remain neutral, and it would keep the British from impressing sailors off of privately owned U.S. vessels. U.S. had no way to enforce this act. We weren't militarily strong. We didn't maintain a standing army. We had almost nothing of a navy. And the major effect of this non-importation act of 1806 was that it hurt U.S. citizens because they had less goods they could buy. And then the British goods were cheaper when they were imported. It cost more for Americans to create the same goods. So you've got U.S. citizens. They now have less products to buy, and what products they can buy made in the United States are more expensive. Here's British hostilities continuing these three acts. The Embargo Act of 1807. This banned exports from the United States. So we can't allow anything to leave the United States and go to a foreign country where it would be sold. This became very unpopular because businesses, even agricultural ones, I mean, with the South having cotton that it was selling to Britain, where they were making clothing with it, and what few manufactured goods the U.S. had and would attempt to trade, all of a sudden you can't export anything from the United States due to the Embargo Act. This was the worst piece of legislation during the Jefferson administration. It got Jefferson into a tremendous amount of trouble. It was very unpopular among the U.S. population, and it didn't hurt the British at all. You know, they're losing 1/10 of 1% of the total trade that they've got going on in the world, or I don't know what the figure was. It might have been 3%, but the fact is, it didn't hurt them. Non-Intercourse Act of 1809. Let's take a look at that. Okay, we're going to start up trade again. That other act was a huge mistake. So trade begins again with the Non-Intercourse Act. But it said you can trade with the whole world except Britain and France. Well, Britain's the big manufacturing country. U.S. citizens still are not getting what they need. They're not getting what they want. You know, Britain is the place. And again, this did little harm to Great Britain. We were a minor percentage of the goods they were selling around the world. Let's take a look at these British hostilities, such as the impressment, the trade issue, etc. Let's do some analysis of it. These three acts actually helped the United States in terms of industrializing. The great industrialization in the United States was 60 years later, really occurred between the end of the Civil War and the turn of the century in 1900. But there was some industrialization in the United States. Here's a photograph of some women not working during the Jefferson administration when Madison was the Secretary of State. Photography didn't exist until the late 1830s, and this is a photograph. But this industrialization that got added within the United States, due to these three laws that were attempting to hurt Britain and trade with Britain, this industrialization made up for a lack of goods. The United States now produce, and it had been producing as a result of these three pieces of legislation. There was a tremendous benefit to U.S. merchants with these laws that led to an increase of industrialization within the United States. United States citizens were now buying products manufactured within the U.S. A negative of this argument made by many historians is that this is further proof the U.S. is an oligarchy. An oligarchy is a rule of the few at the top. Well, the growth of some industry during the Jefferson administration, due to a lack of trade with Britain, meant that you ended up with a class of people who were not simply wealthy agriculturalists, but were now also wealthy industrialists. So we're still, it did more to create an upper class that basically benefited themselves. Let's take a look at James Madison as what happens to people who have been Secretary of State and then become president. Madison is one of these people. There are 6 men who have been Secretary of State and became president. They were all in the 1800s. Thomas Jefferson, pictured here, was Secretary under was here is James State before his. Here is Martin Van Buren. He was the Secretary of State who became president, and James Buchanan, who was president 1857 to 1861, right before Abraham Lincoln. He had been Secretary of State. So the last Secretary of State elected to the presidency was Buchanan in 1857. That's a long time ago. There have been 71 Secretaries of State. Here's Buchanan. He's the last person, Secretary of State, who got elected to the presidency. That's over 170 years ago. Being Secretary of State is now seen as a dead-end job. If you want to be president, stay as far away from being Secretary of State as you can get. 1808, election for the president. Jefferson's not running again. It would be a third term. Let's take a look at the political parties. Madison was a prospect for the Democrats. Jefferson had been a Democratic president. Madison was now stepping forward for the 1808 election. Things were looking pretty good because the Federalist Party was falling apart like a cookie crumbling. The Democrats had problems. That Embargo Act of 1807, people don't forget, it cost citizens of the United States a great deal because foreign products were cheaper than U.S. manufactured products. Lack of trade with England was a difficulty. So, okay, Federalist Party is crumbling, but the Democrats are being blamed for some very bad trade policies. Madison had opposition within the Democratic Party. There was a faction within the Democratic Party. It was known as the Tertium Quids. This is the founder, John Randolph. He was a founding father, and he was the founder of this group, Tertium Quids, within the Democratic Party. What does it mean? Tertium means flexible, and quid is the British pound. So they're talking about flexible money here, making the financial situation flexible. Flexible currency. These tertium quids didn't want the government controlling currency. This was the big issue. They were strict constructionists when it came to the United States Constitution. Very narrow, very conservative view and interpretation of the Constitution. Here's an amazing thing. These tertium quids, they're still in existence today, even though nobody's heard of them. They're an anti-tax group, as they kind of started out as, very little federal power, especially when it comes to money, minting money, etc., controlling currency. They're still around. They're an anti-tax group. Take a look at the candidates in 1808. A member of the tertium quids was future President James Monroe, pictured here, not to be confused with James Madison. He sought the Democratic nomination also. This is George Clinton. Now, he's a founding father. Not rhythm and soul singer decades ago. So George Clinton, he sought the Democratic nomination. Madison won it. Federalist Party, again, very weak, fallen apart. Nominated Charles Pinckney. Here's a pencil drawing of Pinckney. He's a founding father. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He was a Southerner, governor of South Carolina for 4 terms, 4 times elected. Results of the election. And Pinckney. Electoral the 60s and got almost 2/3 of the electoral states. Pinckney won 5. Popular vote, 125,000 to 62,000. That's 64% to 32%. So here, even in the popular vote, Madison gets nearly 2/3 of the. This is game. Is considered 5 points or more. So 48 to 53, you got yourself what today is called a landslide victory. Here's a victory of 32.4%. Gigantic. Let's take a look at the cabinet of Madison. Politics. Cabinet choices by Madison are ranked as very poorly done by most historians and political scientists. He had little experience really about government working and pretty minimal knowledge. He had handled foreign affairs, but he had little input from the State Department. He wasn't knowledgeable about foreign affairs, and he didn't allow people that were to talk to him much when he was Secretary of State under Jefferson. So he seldom called cabinet meetings. He wasn't real big on listening to what other people had to say. starting to sound like a dictatorship a little bit, but anyway, he wasn't bringing people in when he was president. He was pretty much acting alone. He's not getting advice, not talking to people in the know. The National Bank Charter. This is the first national bank of the United States. It was owned by the federal government. It was run by the federal government. We had a national bank that controlled currency up to the 7th president, Andrew Jackson, who got rid of it in the early 1830s. The charter for this national bank didn't renew in 1811. It did renew then a couple of years later. So lots of arguing during this 1789 to 1830 period, roughly, when we were in and out of how much control should the government have over currency in particular. So here is the national bank building that controlled U.S. currency. The bank was renewed in 1816, so we had that 5-year period with no bank, 1811 to 1816. It had 6 major purposes. It would loan money to the federal government. So the federal government was sure to get a loan when it went to the national bank owned by the federal government. And any money the federal government took in, taxes were outlawed in the Constitution, income taxes on individuals, but there were tariffs. So anytime a country would bring in goods to the U.S., the federal government would charge them something. I think it was about 50 cents a ton. So the federal government was getting money. That money was deposited in this national bank. And it was seen as a safe bank. State banks, local banks within cities, they were unregulated. They were issuing currency. It wasn't good outside their own territory. It was a mess. So lots who supported a national bank saw the First National Bank of the United States as a safe place to put your money. The currency that it issued was uniform, could be used all across the United States, whereas state and local banks could issue their own currency, which was only trusted locally. Look here, here's a New Jersey bank $1 bill. Here's a $5 bill from a Maryland bank. Can you imagine every bank in the United States issuing its own currency? You could be walking around with the currency of 5 different banks in your pocket. The national bank, it promoted business. It could make loans into the private sector as well as to the federal government. So this money that businesses needed and that state and local banks might have been fearful about borrowing to them. What if they go out of business? What if we lose our money? You know, the national bank felt greater security in loaning to these private individuals who were starting businesses or increasing businesses. And the 6th and final, it placed the U.S. on solid footing with foreign currencies. Wanted to trade with foreign countries, and if money was involved, you weren't handing money from a local bank in South Carolina. You were saying, this is the currency of the United States of America. The Wilkinson Scandal. This is James Wilkinson. He was a general in the United States Army, and he got investigated by the House of Representatives during the Madison administration. He was charged with spying for Spain. Here's Spain, France to the north, Portugal to the west, and here is the Strait of Gibraltar and northern Africa to the south, Mediterranean Sea, Spain. He did this spying under 3 presidents. It came to light under Madison, but the 3 presidents that he did it under were Washington, Adams, and Jefferson. Wilkinson, once he was going to be tried, said, I'd prefer a military court-martial. I don't want to be in a United States courtroom charged with this stuff. The investigations began in 1810. The House wrote up no report. They said, we're not going to deal with this. Wilkinson was certain that if the military handled it, he'd be declared. Madison denied Wilkinson's request now. Madison's president. It's 1810. Madison says, nope, it's not going to be handled by military courts. So no action is taken by the House of Representatives. Madison does nothing. The whole thing just goes away. It looks like Wilkinson is just simply acquitted then. Jefferson afterwards appoints him governor of this new Louisiana territory. So he escaped any difficulties as a result. But then Aaron Burr headed out to Louisiana territory. Everybody figured Burr was going to try to take it over and establish a third nation within the Louisiana territory. And Wilkinson was talking to Burr. That information got back to Madison, and Madison fired him. There's Wilkinson at the top, Burr at the bottom. Letters show that they had an association. Letters have been Burr went to trial, and Wilkinson testified against him. He stated those letters where it looked like I was making a deal with Burr, that was simply to get Burr to write back to me showing that he was attempting to take over part of Louisiana territory, and then I'd have evidence against him later at a trial, which is exactly what's happening. So this there's a second charge now, House of Representatives, 1810. There was a very high casualty rate among the soldiers under the command of Wilkinson. This was a real trial. He was acquitted. Over a year later, this is December of 1811, Madison wants a court-martial. Now, Madison had said, no, you can't have a court-martial. Now he's saying, I want a court-martial, but all I want it to do is to remove him from any military command. He was acquitted and then reinstated into the military. Wilkinson was. Madison removes him. He says, you're fired. Your performance has been very poor. It's been scandalous. There's a court-martial again within the military. He is acquitted again. In 1815, Madison fires him, says, get out of here. You're removed from the military. Nothing more happens. In 1825, 10 years after Madison fires him and says, getting rid of you, Wilkinson dies. 1854, this historian here, Charles Guerrieri, or I'm not sure how to pronounce that in French. If I was still among people, I would go to some French speaker and ask how that was pronounced. So anyway, In 1854, a historian pictured here finds evidence that Wilkinson was given lots of money from Spain. Spain made huge payments to Wilkinson. He was indeed spying for Spain. They show him giving Spain advice about how to stop the westward expansion of the United States. Remember, Spain owned Florida, and they refused when Madison was Secretary of State. They refused to talk about allowing the United States to purchase Florida. And so Spain, he did a great deal. Wilkinson did a great deal of information delivery to Spain about the Lewis and Clark expedition, what they were going to do, what was expected of them, what they found out once they had returned. His go-between was Esteban Rodriguez, man pictured here, who was a Spanish diplomat. Spain controlled land, not just Florida over here, but look at this. All this gray area that was a part of Mexico was also controlled by Spain. Spain lost that land 30 years later in the 1845 war, the Spanish-American War. We took all of this land here from Mexico. Texas had gained independence in the mid-1830s on its own. But Texas to California becomes a part of the United States. So Wilkinson's appointed U.S. envoy to Mexico. He's still in good graces, and that's when he ends up getting himself fired. And he stayed in Mexico, was worried about retaliations in the United States, died in Mexico City in 1825, and he's buried there. Madison was criticized by historians, said, how could this guy have gotten away with this kind of spying and continued to be part of the U.S. military? Why wasn't action taken against him? There were so many accusations, so many acquittals. Why would you allow him to remain and even be reappointed? So Madison got a lot of criticism as a result of this Wilkinson affair. Theodore Roosevelt stated about Wilkinson, in all our history, there is no more despicable a character. The War of 1812 is up next. We're at a point where we can take a look at any questions you might have.
Okay. This one might be kind of early to ask. I'm going to start at the end of the questions currently and work backwards. Just someone wondering if Madison is considered to be a high or low ranking president in terms of, but seeing as we're still in the midst.
Every few years, there is a poll taken. That includes about 800 historians across the United States. And I have not looked up Madison's ranking, but his really great accomplishments are not as president. They're as writer of the Constitution.
Okay.
And the formation of the United States, his role in the American Revolution. And I'm going to look up real quick here Madison's rankings. And these rankings were started by I can't think of the name of the historian, and then his son continued them. Then when the son died, it was taken over by Siena College, which is a Catholic school. And they do them irregularly, but at least every 4 years, they have you rank the presidents. And they have added to it. It's not just simply a ranking anymore. They have 20 categories, and you rank each president on each of those 20 categories. You can look up SIENA, Siena College Rankings. Just type it in, and you can look at each president. It's really heavily detailed. So let me see if I can get started again here. Madison rankings. So anyway, these it's quite a detailed set of information. Let's see, I gotta go with James Madison. It wants to show me Madison, Wisconsin. I gotta get.
Okay. Well, that's something we
Yeah,
can look forward to. Maybe we can do some research and touch
yeah.
on that next week.
Well, and I might interrupt the between questions coming up here. So
Okay.
anyway, go ahead.
So someone's wondering, did France accept US dollars for the Louisiana Purchase?
Uh, well, I don't know. I suspect so. I suspect that's how they were paid. And, there were agreements between the countries that they would recognize each other's currencies. Uh, uh, so they had exchange programs. It's only recently, especially and only in Europe, where we have developed a currency that's good in a wide variety of European countries.
Hmm.
Starts with a P. That's not pesos. That's
Well,
I
the
can't
euro, but
that European currency that's been developed anyway.
right,
Uh,
the euro.
Euro, yeah, like I said, it starts with a P.
That's how I got it.
Starts
Uh,
with an E, yeah, the euro. And that isn't 20 years old hardly, I don't think. So we've finally gotten a currency. I have friends in Europe. I have a cousin there. A guy I taught with here in the US is from Portugal. He just loves going back and visiting his mother, and how easy it is to travel into Spain and France nowadays and so on. But as to whether, I think they probably accepted US currency and
okay.
then exchange stuff with other countries that they were working.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Follow-up question on Wilkinson. What was the group that kept Madison from getting rid of him, seeing as he tried so many times? Was there a specific political faction or?
It was mostly the House of Representatives, and it was lots of Federalists who were
Okay.
still in the House, but it was also fellow Democrats. The fellow Democrats were concerned that they didn't want a scandal during the years that there was a Democrat in the presidency. Consequently, you got these decisions that came out of Congress that said, first, we're not going to do anything about it. It's because it would make it look bad for Madison, which would make it look bad for Democrats generally. Nobody wants to make themselves look bad. This stuff happened. If this stuff happened during the presidency of a Democrat, we'll lose the next election. We're talking about this very thing today, and it involves the Mexican border.
Okay.
And that's yeah, it's the same sort of issue. Has anything been done at the border we're going to hear more and more about this. What has Biden done at the border? And of course, the response that the Democrats can use today is what did Trump do during his 4 years? And of course, that same argument could have been used back in Madison's day, because this guy Wilkinson was operating over a 30-year period, giving information as a spy to Spain. So there was a hey, we don't want to hurt ourselves. There was also a lack of belief that such a thing could be going on. Yeah.
Okay, so a question on during this time, mainly, when he's Secretary of State and then into his presidency, what was Germany doing during this time as part of the equation?
Well, Germany was not a nation.
Okay,
Yeah,
true.
it was made up of individual states. The dominant state was Prussia,
Hmm.
and the king of Prussia was really the big name in Europe. There was no unified Germany at this time, and Prussia was attacking other parts of Germany. It was attacking Poland and other places, and Bavaria was an individual state, and there were several nations that are in existence today that they were either, I mean, there was the Ottoman Empire that was coming into Europe. So you had states that ended up becoming a part of a huge conquest uh, by other countries. And then you had nation states today that weren't yet nation states. And Germany was in that situation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go back to Dolly. Someone who wanted clarification on, was it Dolly's son who married Van Buren's niece, or was it Van Buren's son who married a relative of Dolly?
No, it was Dolley Madison's son
No,
married Van Buren's niece.
no, I don't think so.
Oh,
I think it was Van Buren's eldest son married a distant relative of Dolly, because on your slide you have it as Dolly's niece married Van Buren's son, and I did a quick check, and I'm pretty sure that
oh,
um yeah, his eldest son Abraham Van Buren married Angelica Singleton, and she is a relative of Dolly Madison.
okay. I'll look
And
it
so
up.
your slide is right. I just think
I said it wrong.
you did it backwards, but that's
Okay.
something
I'll
we
look,
clarify.
I'll look it up. I got it written down,
Okay.
and I'll restate it next week at the beginning.
Okay. And then we had John Renwick, one of our participants, did some fact finding for us while we were doing this.
Oh,
The Siena poll ranks Madison as number 10 below JFK and above Barack Obama
yeah,
on
okay.
their latest poll.
There are a total of 45 presidents. He's in the top 10. Yeah.
So at this point in time,
Thank-
also he was able to look up about the Washington painting that Dolly saved. It says, according to mountvernon.org, the original Gilbert Stuart portrait of Washington is the one hanging in the National Portrait Gallery. But Stuart also painted copies, and the one is on display in the East Room of the White House, and that is the one that Dolly rescued. And then there's one hanging in the Old State House in Hartford, Connecticut, and one in the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts Museum.
Okay, those are the ones, yeah, that I couldn't
And there are
find.
some other painters who've done copies of that also.
Wow, good.
And then one final one, we just have time to sneak in. Someone wondering, did Madison give birth to the Electoral College? And would that be the modern Electoral College, or there was one before? So,
No, the Electoral College has been around since the beginning of the Constitution. So
yep.
there's lots of people that want to get rid of it and say we should just simply have it based on popular vote. Hillary Clinton recently won the popular vote by, I think it was 3 million votes, but lost the election to Donald Trump. That's happened 4 times in US history. Popular vote winner not winning the Electoral College. My argument, some guy in Louisiana stuffing a ballot box, Louisiana electoral vote. We get rid of the Electoral College, and the same guy stuffing the ballot box in Louisiana is now affecting the outcome nationally because we are deciding elections based on popular vote, not an electoral college. So it does aid in a kind of manner of eliminating cheating. But if we got rid of the electoral college, I'd like to see us have something like an army that would be at each polling place. It'd be very expensive. I mean, there are tens of thousands of polling places, but what we currently have is some Republicans, some Democrats, they're observers, and but there's still corruption. So anyway, good. Well, my thanks to everybody.
And thank you, JB. It's been, oh, wait, one quick last question.
Great.
Then why are no governors elected via the Electoral College? That's, okay, that's because,
Well, they'd have to do it by county, or they might do it by districts that they would set up.
yep.
And then the whole thing would be based on population. But yeah, governors are, every other official in the United States is elected by popular vote.
Okay, well, we are at 2:00. It has been a lovely time, and I just hope that everyone has a great rest of your day. And thank you once again, JB, for just sharing your knowledge with us. Have a good day.